Well, thanks for joining me today in the Story Crafters Cafe. This is Hank Garner, your host and moderator of this conversation. I'm super excited to welcome my good friend Richard Fox to the show today to talk all about writing space opera and military sci-fi and finding your passion in your writing space. You may know uh, Richard from his very successful space opera series, the Ember War series, and all of the stories and series that connect to that. And we're going to talk all about that today. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, super excited to dig in. So Richard, I started. I came up with a question that I've asked a couple of people already, and I think it's a fun way to start off a conversation about writing. What is a piece of writing advice that you've gotten from someone, and maybe it's a fantastic piece of advice that you refer back to and that has kind of changed the way you think about writing and maybe publishing, or maybe it's a just horrible piece of advice that you think back on and thank God I didn't do that, or maybe I did do that, and those people didn't know what in the world they were talking about. Do you have anything like that that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, well, for bad advice, it really you have to don't trust anything from Ernest Hemingway because he has a lot of famous like little Hemingwayisms, but then you
Yeah,
look at his life and he didn't follow any of them at all.
right.
So I have a feeling he was just trolling everyone who kept pestering him about how to be an awesome writer. But as for really good advice, gosh, help me out here, Hank. Who was the guy that directed the first two Avenger movies? I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, I am too, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
Um, Giant Head. He's been in trouble lately, and then but so he directed a movie, or he wrote a movie called The Cabin in the Woods, which was actually pretty
Yes.
good. And I listened to the director's commentary through there, and one of the things he says is that it's very important for the story for what does the reader or audience know, and when do they know it? And that always stuck with me because it's like if you know what the reader knows, and
Right.
then you can play with what their perceptions are and when do they learn this piece of information, because sometimes as a writer we can drop a little seed, early on in the book, and then you come back to it. So
Right.
how you're setting up your Chekhov's guns and where you're starting off your story arcs is real important. And just be cognizant of when does the reader know this piece of information, and how is it going to affect the whole rest of their story. It's always like that. It's how do you build tension? If the audience knows there's a bomb under a table during the course of a conversation, and the two characters don't know there's a bomb, then
Right.
the reader's like, ah, there's a bomb, do something. Meanwhile, the characters are like, this cheese sandwich is fantastic. So so what does the audience know? When do they know it? And then how does that affect the story? That was a good piece of advice that I've always kept in mind.
So speaking of that, do you have a system that you've developed that helps you track, what you've told the reader and how you're kind of dealing out those pieces of information to the audience? Do you have a way to track that, or
But
is it
I,
just in your mind knowing this is something I have to keep track of?
I'm a big outliner.
Okay.
So sometimes I'll put in, during my outlines I'll say, make sure to to pay this off later on, or when I'm doing the outline I'll go, hey, wait, I need to set this up, and going back into an outline and knowing where to put in plot points before you start writing the manuscript has been a huge time saver. Also, it doesn't tends to stop those moments of existential dread where you think, oh, I'm 50,000 words into the story. Oh no, I totally screwed up my second act because I didn't set it. I did no, I had to rewrite my first act to make my second act work. But then when I
Right.
rewrite the first act, now the second act doesn't work. So outlining for me solves that problem a lot of the time.
So since you went to outlining so early in our conversation, I have to ask you this. Everybody likes to divide writers into two camps, either plotters or pantsers.
Right.
And whether you believe that or not, that people fit snugly into one or the other, that's a whole different conversation. But the other camp would say that outlining kills the story, takes all of the spontaneity out of it. You've heard all the arguments that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Stephen King wrote half of On Writing about why you should never outline.
Mm.
How do you answer those criticisms?
Well, I tell you, outlining solves a whole bunch of problems during the manuscript process, and then, as far as taking out spontaneity, when I have my outline and then I'm writing the manuscript, every once in a while the muse will still lean over and whisper in my ear, "He doesn't like hamburgers," or something like that, and it's just something
Right.
ridiculous. And then I'm like, "Oh, that actually works." And I found
Yeah.
like the better the outline, and if I get one of those, the good idea fairy shows up, generally I can still work that in.
Yeah.
So I've not had a point yet where I've been, it's actually, I have had a couple times where I've got the really good outline, and then I'm writing the story and I realize, oh no, this needs to go in a very different direction, but with all the same sort of beats.
Yeah.
So because I still had the story worked out, I can just maneuver that way, and it didn't really hurt the story too much. It just took a little bit longer to write.
Well, and if the muse does whisper, something about hamburgers, then you have the ability to check your outline to see if that's, sometimes the muse gives bad advice. Just because you get a whisper in your ear doesn't mean you need to chase it down. Maybe, maybe that's going to trigger something else down the road. But every idea that comes in your head is not necessarily a good idea.
No, not always. There's been a couple series where I've had, I intended for a certain plot line to happen, but then it
Yeah.
just never did. Or rather, if I tried to put that plot line in, it would have felt shoehorned. And I
Right.
think readers can pick up on that pretty quick, where they're sitting there going like, "I'm just reading fluff," and they just start skipping. And that's I always try to never have fluff in any of my stories. It's always
Yeah.
important to the script.
Y- You have a very popular series and then sub-series that have been spawned from this series in the space opera slash military sci-fi space, um in the Ember Wars, and this has been a wild success for you. um but you didn't begin writing sci-fi, and I happen to know that you have been a sci-fi fan from the time you were a kid. I've
Yes.
heard you talk um all the time about your love of Star Trek The Next Generation, and how you spent your allowance money on new Star Trek novels as they came out. So you were a sci-fi head,
Yep.
way back in the day. But when you started writing, you actually started writing historical fiction and kind of espionage thrillers. I think there was an espionage series that you wrote, 4 or 5 books, if I remember right.
4 books. Yeah.
Four books, yeah. Um, and you wrote enough in those genres um, to be an established author in those genres. Uh, and then you took like a hard left turn into or what you're writing now. First off, that my first question is, and by no means do I mean that people can have only one passion and one genre that they love, because I read all over the place. I love thrillers, I love sci-fi, I love fantasy, and some of those don't feel like they're connected at all. Although I just love great storytelling. Um, what was it that got you interested in, and what made you think that that was the place that you needed to be in your writing career at the time?
Well, so I started off with military thrillers, and when I started, I had finished my second tour in Iraq as a military intelligence officer, and then I was working as an intelligence analyst in the D.C. area, and so everything about the background was like, clearly military thrillers is the thing for you.
Right.
I was immediately more qualified than Tom Clancy, who was a real estate agent with a library card.
Right.
So I think, okay, I've got the background. I should be able to knock this out of the park. And so the problem is I was writing military thrillers sort of from the military veteran perspective of what
Right.
these should be. And the vast majority of people who read military thrillers are not in the military.
Right.
So and those and so those 4 titles didn't sell well, but they were they got good enough reviews. People were like, oh, this isn't bad. So I had
Yeah.
that boost of confidence. People weren't saying this is terrible, but rather it just didn't really appeal to that wider audience.
Hmm.
And then I had written the Red Baron, which is a World War One novel, and I had that the first thing I ever wrote was a screenplay for the Red Baron. And so when I was sitting around thinking, well, what should I write next? Well, I had this screenplay and pretty much an already done story for the Red Baron, and turning that screenplay into a book was pretty easy, actually.
Yeah.
So, but then I was thankful that I got some mentorship from Russell Blake, who's really big in the indie
Oh yeah.
military thriller space. And I came to him and like, what am I doing wrong? And he said, have you considered a different genre? Which may have been his really polite way of saying this was not for me. I kind of wasn't gonna succeed there. And then I'm like, well, I've loved Star Wars since before I could walk. Maybe I should try a military thriller, or excuse me, military science fiction, space opera, sort of space adventure sort.
Yeah.
And turns out that really, when it comes time to write, what you've read and really had a passion about reading for your whole life, when it's time to write, writing that really works. I had the logical assumption of, well, I'm military background, intelligence analyst background. I should be writing these things. Meanwhile, I had not been reading military thrillers my entire life. I had not been
Right.
reading John le Carré and all those classic spy novels my entire life. But I had been reading Star Wars. I've been reading Star Trek. I knew Warhammer 40,000 inside and out.
Right.
So, it's like if the passion is in one genre and you can write in that genre, you're probably going to do really well because you've done the groundwork. If you sit there and like, if all your entire reading experience has been westerns, and you sit there thinking, I need to write Harlequin romance, might not work. So, but if you sit there and go, I'm going to write westerns now, go for it. You're 99% of the way there.
So when you had this epiphany, and you think, okay, maybe this is where I need to focus my attention. How do you, because I know you're a big planner, you're a plotter. When you started that first Ember War book, did you have I think probably you didn't have an idea that it would turn into what it's turned into, but were you thinking a series? Or were you thinking this is going to be one standalone book? Like, how did you
I had a
get your feet
series.
wet?
Yeah, I had a series in mind with the Ember War where I had, but like I knew exactly what was going to happen in the first book, and then I had pretty solid ideas for like up to like book 5 or so.
Yeah.
And I had the very last scene in mind for the Ember War, which was going to be the main characters are standing in this alien, vessel, and the aliens who were helping them out just abandoned them, and now humanity was all alone in a galaxy that did not like them. So I just wanted to have that kind of what the heck do we do now sort of moment, and that's where I knew the story was going to end. It was right there, so it was good to have that end state in mind. But then like so some of this, like I have my original notes for the whole series, and like one of the things, like book 5 was maybe Prison Planet, or it was book 3 defend cat people from while the it was really vague, but like
Right.
this is gonna be good here. And then as the story progressed, I started realizing, well, okay, I need to how to solve this whole thing happened. And during the course of the story, I realized, oh, I got to deal with this evil space god, or how do I deal with that? And I thought, oh wait, I have my own other space god over here. I can just bring him in, and that ended up being like I hadn't planned on that being a thing. I just thought it was going to be like a little piece of information that this thing that the main characters recovered from this one space god, and turns out I was able to use that space god as the linchpin to finalize the whole story. And then that evil space god ends up coming back in the 3rd series as a big problem. So it all worked out pretty well. It's nice to know you could look at all the pieces I have and like, well, how can I move them around? And
Right.
it's good to do that.
So as you started writing it, when did you realize that you had hit um the thing that was going to be the success for you? Was it in I guess let me ask it this way. Did you know in writing that book this is where I'm supposed to be, or was it after the book was written and you started marketing the book and it started finding an audience, and then realizing that this story was resonating with people? Is that what kind of gave you the validation? Where did you start seeing the validation?
But with the Ember War, it was I told myself, okay, if this doesn't sell, then I don't have the touch, I don't have the magic. I guess I'm going to just abandon this forever. It's going to be like, I wrote a book once, haha. But
Right.
so when it came time to do the Ember War, I just said I'm going to have as much. I'm just going to have a lot of fun with this, and just just had a huge amount of fun writing it. And I thought, okay, this is going to be like a Michael Bay movie, but with marginally better dialogue.
Right.
That was my plan for the Ember War. And so I put it out there, and then it actually sold really well. And like I remember when like the first time I sold more than 100 copies of Single Day, I woke my wife up, and she don't do this, guys at home. You know, to tell your wife that you sold $100 in the middle of the night, she's not going to be pleasant. Please. So no, I'm like, hey, I sold over $100. I will be gosh darned. People really like this. Oh, maybe I'm onto something. You know. So it
Right.
was the feedback from the free market that said where enough readers were going, hey, I like that. Click buy. And actually, now I'm at the point after about 7 years of full time writing where I'm this close to selling my 1 millionth book. I'm just waiting for some sales reports from Bain and a couple other places. I'm this close. I'm like 981,000 books sold. And if I could so it's going to happen this year for sure. But my millionth book is coming. So, but then and then when I put out the second book, and I said, yeah, I'm still going to have as much fun as I can. And when I was writing the second book, it's mostly one small team running around a planet trying to find this one artifact that's been hidden. And I realized this is kind of boring because they're just ducking probes, alien, the bad guys. And I was like, it's a little boring. Like, I need more here. And then I looked back through my other ideas I've written down, and like, I had this one thought for, just in my notes, it's free the farm. And what that is, aliens had captured a bunch of humans thousands of years ago, and
Yeah.
were just breeding them and keeping them kind of like farm animals. And there was this one team of Space Marines had to go in there, say, "Hey, no, they're going to eat you. Let's have a revolt and get out." And I just had this idea for who these aliens were that were keeping human beings as cattle. And I'm looking at the second book, and I thought, well, this is boring. Hey, I got this other idea. Why don't I bring these bad guys in here to make things interesting? So now the second book has evil alien lizards that feed off brains, and then at the end there's this giant crystal jellyfish. It's insane, but somehow people love it. People, they really do love it. So I can't argue with my audience. So they like what they like, and I just give them more of it.
Do you find yourself in writing feeling like that 10-year-old sci-fi fan, just living the dream that you always
Yeah,
had?
there'll be a lot of times where like this is gonna be freaking awesome. Or, I don't care how ridiculous it is. He's gonna drop through the ceiling, and then it's just gonna be crazy. So, it's good to have fun while
Yeah.
you're writing, but then also to know where like this may be a little too far. Let's step it back just a bit.
Well, there's definitely a feeling of fun and satisfaction that comes with knowing that you found your spot, that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, as opposed to I know that money can be made with publishing if I work the business like this and like this and like this. I know that I can, eventually be successful at it. That doesn't necessarily equate to happiness, although it can be said the more money you make, the happier you can get. But there's something to be said about finding your passion and being able to make money from that. That's just a whole different level of satisfaction.
Yeah, and it's thing is, no matter what job you're in, you always have bills.
Right.
So you do have to pay the bills, and if you can find something that you love doing and pays the bills, you will never work a day in your life. And
100%.
and so, but also sometimes you have to. There's that old adage of no tears in the author, no tears in the reader, no surprise in the author, no surprise in the reader. And if someone is just writing something because, well, gosh, I got a deadline and I got to get it done, it's the story is probably going to come across pretty flat for the audience because they're going to pick up on that lack of passion. And I think
Right.
there's one, I think, was it Raymond Chandler? There's one noir author who his real passion was poetry, but my
Mhm.
gosh, could he crank out noir novels that people love to read? But he really wanted to just write poetry, and that's all. But his publisher only wanted the noir novels because the noir novels sold. So he eventually cut a deal with them that said, "Look, I'll keep writing you noir novels, but you have to publish my poems too." And the publisher wisely said, "Okay, fine." So, and but I tell you, one series was his passion, and the other one paid his mortgage.
Yeah. Whatever works.
Yeah,
Whatever works. You mentioned a minute ago that you are in your seventh year as a full-time author.
right.
I'm assuming that since doing this full time, that your daily writing uh, ritual slash running the business of being an indie author has probably changed a little bit. What's a typical day look like for you?
Right. Well, it's I noticed that the writing ends up happening around my children's schedule because
Yeah,
kids, I have young boys, and they're, they don't quite understand. Daddy needs 36 hours alone to finish this book. They don't understand it. They're like, it's
right.
bedtime, Dad. Come on. So, but no, normally, I wake up, I get the kids up, push them out to school, and I can sit down. I've got a good 6 to 7 hours by myself, and that's when I'm most likely not going to be bothered, and I can sit down and focus and knock out the words. So I've noticed that I need long stretches of being left alone, excuse me, to write. So I would normally write for about 55 minutes, take a break, you do a little bit of exercise to keep the blood flowing, get a snack, coffee, come back, do it again for another 55 or so minutes, and then keep doing that over and over again. And then evenings or maybe sometimes early mornings is when, okay, now it's time for emails. Now it's time to manage ads. Now it's time to handle back matter. So I save all the little ankle biters to the
Yeah.
end of the day when I don't need to be focused and creative, because I'm sitting there just copying and pasting back matter into a new book, and you're updating a cover. This is not something that requires a lot of brain power.
Yeah.
So I save that to the end of the day when it's just, I can sit there with a rum and coke and like, I'm just fix this book down. So
Right. Are you the kind of person, some authors have to write every single day, whether they're working on a particular project or whatever. And then some authors I know will section off 6, 8, 12 weeks at a time. And that's when they're drafting a book and nothing else matters. And then they'll take, 2, 3 months off and kind of do the other business of life, and the writing kind of gets shut off, and you take a mental break from it. Are you the kind of person that has to stay at it every day, or do you like to segment off life to writing and other times?
I've noticed that I will get into a rhythm of preparing the book, writing the outline, getting covers going, and then it finally coalesces into, now it's time to sit down and bang it out. And then I'll spend a good 2 or 3 weeks or however long the story needs, and then just be working on the word count. And then I send that off to editors, and while they're doing their thing, I decompress a little bit from that story, and then move to, then start the whole process over again for
Yeah,
the next story. So it's a lot of, preparing, action, and then
yeah.
prepare, action, like that.
Um, y- you have been wildly successful as an indie author, and no one can argue with the impact that you've made there. Um, Over the last 10 years or so, since the indie revolution, the Kindle revolution, let's be honest with it, um, kind of happened, and the publishing landscape really changed and opened all kind of avenues for authors. We have, uh, as is, uh, as happens with humans, we want to fall into camps, and you've got the indie authors versus the traditionally published authors, and you tend to, little skirmishes and wars tend to pop up. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Mm.
um you recently signed a contract with Bain Books, didn't you? Which is a traditional publisher in the science fiction space. And what are your thoughts about doing that? And what was your motivation in wanting to kind of split your work?
Right. Well, so I was indie for the vast majority of,
Hmm.
of my career, and then as things went on, David Weber said, "Hey, come write this series with me," and of course that was going to be done through Bain. And
Yeah,
then I got to meet with Tony Weisskopf. I talked to her a lot, and I thought, speaking with her, I'm like, I would love to have her edit some of my, because I've never had a developmental editor, or somebody who can come along and say, Richard, this would really improve the story. It's never happened.
Yeah.
It's always been like, I'm just going to do it. So, but as for the two camps, it really is if you as the writer, if you are the one kind of guy, it depends on how much of the entrepreneur side you want to do.
Yeah.
So if you're okay with doing your own covers, getting your own editors, and doing all the work around publishing the book, then okay, then you're good there. There's other people out there who they just sit there and like, I want to write and then be done. And then for those folks, the traditional side is obviously much better for them. So, but straddling, going through the two, it's a personal choice. I mean, I don't think there's any, who publishes your book doesn't make the book any better. It doesn't make you as a writer any better. It's really more about, well, which audience is it going to get to? Because I'm starting to realize that there's, people on Amazon or the people who read through Amazon, and they are really voracious readers. So when it comes to those voracious readers, they tend to get a little price conscious. Like, I love reading Warhammer 40,000.
Yeah.
And for some reason, those ebooks are $17 each. And I'm like, $17. I mean, sometimes these ebooks can cost more than the hardbacks.
Right.
So, and for, Warhammer has its own very rabid fan base, so I guess they can get away with charging the prices. But for people who are, starting to get into writing, if you put your first novel out there for $17, there's a lot of readers who are going to be like, nope. I don't know if you're good. And I don't want to spend my time. I don't want to risk my time and $18 because nothing's going to upset someone more if they spend like 3 hours with a story and realize they hate it and toss it away. But then they spent $18 on it. Oh my gosh, you're going to get a bunch of 1-stars for that.
Yeah.
But then you have readers who like, oh, I can get this through Kindle Unlimited. Let me try the first couple chapters through KU, and I like it. Then they read everything.
Yeah.
And there was, oh, I don't like it. I've only lost an hour or two of my time on this story. Okay, they're not as angry. So I think readers really, they're more interested in not wasting their time in a story they're not going to like.
I agree with you. You mentioned that you and David Weber co-authored some books together, and I also know that you and our friend Josh Hayes have co-authored together. He wrote a series with you in your Ember Wars universe. What do you think about the whole co-author dynamic? There seems to be a trend over the last 3 years where some co-authors are really making a big splash. What does that that unique relationship offer you as an author and as a series creator? What does bringing on new voices do for you?
Well, for me, when I've brought on co-authors, it's normally because I don't have the time to tell that story otherwise. So if I hadn't had Josh Hayes and Scott Moon working with me, we probably would not have had Terra Nova come out when it did, and the Terra Nova being a really good, important part of the Ember War universe, and the same with the Terran Strike Marines that Scott Moon did. So it was, I looked at everything I wanted to write, like I can't do it all in the time I have available. I know Scott and Josh can write really well. Let me bring them in, and then we can get these stories out there. So really, and the readers love it because readers get more stories that they like. So that works out for everybody. But when it comes to any sort of writing collaboration, there may be going too far with metaphor, but it's like a marriage. You really have to jive with the person you want to do this with. Versus somebody else, you say, hey, I need this by this time. And then months later, you don't hear from them. And, oh, now the book's out. And then you have to rewrite half of it. And because it's not, what you agreed on that you were going to write with. So, it's amazing how sometimes you can give someone, here, just write this. And then they come back with not that. And it's like, what? I told you exactly what to write. We agreed. And then now there's this whole subplot with a raccoon. Where did this come from? And then the raccoon's not going to work in the story. And then everyone gets upset because you got to say, yeah, I have to cut out the raccoon. And then, but it comes down to collaboration. So there's some collaborations which have been going on forever and ever, like Dune with Kevin J. Anderson and not Frank Herbert, but
Frank
the
other son. Herbert. Yeah.
And And those work really well. And then a lot of the author collaborations that fail miserably, we probably never hear about.
Do you think that I completely agree with the almost marriage relationship that needs to be there, and by that the mutual trust and the more than just mutual trust, but the ability to um, think like one another and to have a similar voice. Um, how do you merge the voices? You know, you have a very particular voice. Josh has a very particular voice. Scott has a very particular voice. But when you do these co-author um, projects, it winds up being a Richard-ish voice.
Right.
It's not like a you create a completely third different voice. It's, you know, how do you merge those things and the very particular ways that authors express themselves?
Well, with Josh and Scott writing in the Ember War already had its sort of its style and
Yeah,
its voice and its tone, and they've read all that and they know it, so they can follow in that. And then when they give me the manuscripts, and I go through and I more Richardize it through some parts,
yeah,
and like there's been a couple parts in like Terra Nova, which had this one humorous scene where they're on this ship that's in space, and they don't have a name for it. So they sit there and like, well, how are they going to name this ship? And they made the classic error of letting the crew, the Marines and the Pathfinders, and basically military guys
yeah,
try to name the ship. And there's this whole process where the names they pull the names out of the hat. It's just more and more ridiculous and offensive as they go along.
right.
Which and I was real proud of that scene. I was really proud of all those jokes I could put in there. And but that was when I was sitting there with Josh, like I had that scene already in my head, and I told Josh, just leave the part blank. I'll fill that in later. So and it's they knew what the style was, and
Yeah.
off we went. And I don't think there's really been a part where readers are like, I can't tell which part was Richard and which part was Josh. And then I've read some collaborations where it's like all of a sudden the tonal there's this huge tonal shift for
Yeah.
3 chapters. Like, okay, I know who wrote that part. So, but when it comes to writing with David Weber, I've been reading David's books since I was like 18.
Right.
So, so when I kind of knew his voice cadence. I knew this is how things are going to happen in there, and then so I was able to approximate David's voice as best I could, and then give the story back to him, and then he makes sure it's all properly, what his audience expects.
Yeah. How many years have you been writing the Ember Wars universe?
This is about seven years now. So I just finished up the end of the story with a book called Legends Rise, and I still have to write one prequel novel that I promised my audience, and that might happen. It should happen this year. Should. So
That's what I was going to ask you. I saw that you posted on Facebook a little while back that you just wrote the final. Um, but what does that mean for you for something that has occupied your life for 7 years? And like you said, you've got the other prequel that you've got to do, um, but this it is kind of wrapping up. What does that feel like?
but it actually feels good because the where the story ends is where the story has ended. And I think there's a lot of times authors will get into the point where like this is selling really well. I can never stop writing it,
Right.
and then the story just kind of drags on and on and on. And for the Ember War, at the end of every series, I realize well, there's something really important that's been left unresolved, and then that gets resolved in the next series. And there's something else that's been unresolved, and that gets resolved in the next series. And now with Legends Rise, there are still problems in the galaxy, but all the ones that the characters have been worried about are pretty much done. And then I also, put a good bow on the whole series for all the readers. And I think readers probably appreciate knowing that the series is done and they can look back and reflect and be happy that the series is done, because a lot of series they just never end, and then the author passes away and then Brandon Sanderson has to come back in and fix the whole dang thing and then finish it.
Right.
So it's I would rather, excuse me, I would rather give readers complete stories
Yeah.
and let them have that sense of completion, and knowing that it's done, than just have one thing that just never ends. and then people feel like, oh my god, another one of these books. What happened now? So it's kind of that the monster of the week sort of problem.
Yeah.
Oh look, the Ember War, they beat the Geist. Oh, now here's this new alien race from beyond the galaxy. It's like, oh my gosh, when is this going to end? So I the story was done, so the story was finished, and I can still always direct people, hey, go read the Ember War now, and as I start doing new series along as those come up. So I like in my reading my library of all titles to kind of like a theme park. Come in for the Ember War ride. Oh, thank you for going through the Ember War. How would you like to go on the Last Fleet roller coaster? Oh, go on the Last Fleet roller coaster. Come on out. Oh, hey, look at this water park with David Weber over here. And then, so people come in, they're having a great time. They just keep having a great time with what I'm writing.
I remember watching the original Star Wars trilogy, arguably the only Star Wars trilogy, but that's a conversation for another time and place. With one of my daughters several years ago, and she really enjoyed it, and so she got on Amazon and started looking for other science fiction that she might enjoy, and she quickly realized that there are more subgenres in science fiction than she was prepared for. You get into military sci-fi, you get into space opera, and it goes on and on and on. Um, how do you think about the subgenres in science fiction? And I know that you write military sci-fi slash space opera. What do those subgenres mean to you, and how do you start? And do you think about them at all when you're planning a series or writing? Are there certain subgenre tropes that you feel need to be included, addressed? It- what are your thoughts on that?
I generally don't go into something thinking this is going to be pure military science fiction. This is only for this genre.
Yeah,
Rather, it's like, okay, this is a great story I have. Where does this fit in what people want? And the Ember War, okay, that's military science fiction space opera. It straddles that line really well. So it's more I know target genres, but rather I have the good story. I just know what it's going to fit into.
yeah,
So and but I generally won't write to the genre. And but as for tropes, when you got your military science fiction, you're going to have a military unit doing things in a military manner, and but then also people expect a certain sort of relationship between all the characters. You have your officers, you have your non-commissioned officers, and you have whatever threat they're facing. And generally, the threat you're facing within military science fiction is going to be very different from the main characters. Because sometimes it's humans fighting humans with the exact same sort of technology, then all of a sudden it
right.
becomes more action adventure. It doesn't feel as much sci-fi when you're fighting other humans. Maybe the humans have augmented themselves to some crazy degree, or they're working with aliens, and you can the more separation you have, the more military science fiction becomes. And as for space opera, there is the overarching sort of political aspect to it.
Yeah,
Versus, you could write a military science fiction story about a squad that's stuck on a planet fighting giant bugs, and generally the next election 3 stars away doesn't really matter. But as for space opera, what those senators from the Galactic Republic are up to, it becomes very important. So it's kind of like that. And as a military historian, I was a military history major in college, and you have like these levels of war. You have the tactical level, which is where most of the shooting happens. You have the operational level, which is where you have the big units maneuvering, and you have like orbital invasions and what's it called? You big movements of tank armies. That's operational. And then you have the strategic level, which is where the politicians are sort of at. So if you kind of at the bottom level with the common soldier, that's more military science fiction. The more you elevate the story, then it starts to become more space opera.
gotcha. If to help people kind of understand those distinctions, where would you place Star Wars and Star Trek in that ranking?
Well, Star Wars, I would say, is more space adventure.
Okay.
And because like the absolute military aspect of it is not as important as the Luke Skywalker's journey to become a Jedi.
Right. It's
So
more
that's very
set
space
dressing than
opera.
anything.
Yeah. Now Star Trek is strangely enough, the more military of it because the USS Enterprise is ostentatiously or ostensibly a military ship, and
Right.
everyone on there has a military rank. But
Right.
they don't do
They're
military things very often. They're
yeah,
all there.
they're space navy that doesn't do very navy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you get more of the Navy stuff back, and when Deep Space Nine happens and they have an
Right.
actual war, and then Cisco's like, well, "Let's talk strategy here," and then for most of the Star Trek audience is like, "What's happening? What's going on?" Versus,
Right.
it should have been this way the whole time. You're in Starfleet, okay? So,
Yeah.
um, but Star Trek is also more the space opera aspect of it because they have relationships with all of the the Klingons and the Romulans and all that. So
Yeah.
that's definitely more space opera there.
Yeah. The stories that you're writing for Bane, does it feel different for you in the writing, knowing that the business aspect of this is not going to be on your shoulders? Whereas when you're writing the Ember War, is there always something in the back of your mind, knowing that I'm going to be responsible for the marketing of this, for this and this and this? And does the writing of a Bane book, does it feel any different when you're in the writing stage? I know the business end of it at the end of the drafting is going to be different. It's just going to be. But when you're writing, does it feel any different?
Well, for right now, the way with what I had to turn in with Bane is that I've got some space, and they wisely said, "Yeah, we want this book in this month, which is months away, and then we want this other book next year." And I'm like, "Next year? That's forever." Versus the stuff I'm writing now, it's like I need this book out in 6 weeks, or the algorithms are going to forget me.
Right.
So it's much more when I'm writing for myself. It's kind of a pulp mentality of I have to keep goosing the algorithms with a new title every so often. Versus with Bane, it's I'm going to give it to them, and then they, have their kind of almost. I don't want to. They have their own publishing schedule and cadence that they've had worked out over decades.
Sure.
So, what goes to them can have a lot more thought to it, and they actually have a lot more white space on the calendar built in. So it's kind of nice to like. I don't have to turn this book into next year. Oh my gosh, I could take a vacation. What's going on? Time off? What?
What is that? With the end of the Ember War, quickly approaching, do you have another grand story that you want to tell? Is there another universe that you want to explore? What's the next big thing that maybe is percolating in the back of your mind?
I got lots. I will occasionally mail my or email myself ideas for series and just say like, okay, that's good. I'll do that later. But for Bane, the first thing that's coming up is a Star Wars is a space adventure series, which I'm really excited about. And then the other one is a very much more um, grounded military sci-fi series. Which and there are some ideas I have for that aren't going to pay off for like a year or two, but I know when this happens, it's going to be fantastic. So then, but there's lots of other grand ideas. Like I still want to do something that I've just in my mind is the Three Kingdoms from China meets Game of Thrones in space. And I'm sitting like, okay, all these. This is going to be like a 9-book giant series. It's going to be huge. It's going to take forever, but it's going to be really good when it happens. And then then I have a thought. What if I did something with androids, on Earth? And I have so many ideas, but right now my writing calendar is packed for like the next 18 months. So I'll get to it eventually. I have plenty of time. Well, I don't have plenty of time, but I've got presumably decades and decades to keep writing.
Love it. I love it. Richard, if folks are just discovering you and want to, find a place to jump into what you're doing and all of the stories that you tell, what's the best way for them to discover all your work, and where would you suggest they plug in?
Yeah, go to Amazon and read the first Ember War book. And if you have an Audible membership, you can pick up the first two audiobooks for absolutely for free through their one program if you have the monthly
Yeah.
subscription. And then I say start with the Ember War, and if the Ember War is not for you, I say read the Exiled Fleet. And if you're really into a harder core military sci-fi, read Hell's Horizon that I wrote with Jonathan Brzee.
Nice. We'll put links to all that in the show notes. I also know that you love to blog and to tell what you think about pop culture type stuff, and some of the funniest um I don't want to say takedowns, but you have very specific opinions about, and it's so fun to read. You blog. What's your website where you blog and all that good
Yeah,
stuff?
Richard Fox author is where I put most of my hit pieces about stories that I generally don't care about. I try to put in some good ones.
Yeah,
It was the Tomorrow War. I actually really like that. Despite a lot of flaws in the storytelling, it was still really good.
it was
So
much better than it had any right to be.
that's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So there was, just I had read an earlier draft of that many moons ago.
yeah.
This is going to be awful. I'm going to destroy this. And then I saw it, and I'm like, I actually like it. Well, I'll be gosh darned. So I much prefer to watch something I enjoy than not. So
Yeah.
that was a happy accident.
Excellent. We'll put links to that in the show notes as well. Richard, thank you so much for taking time to
Thank
come
you,
on the
Hank.
show.
Yeah, great being here. Thanks for having me.